Spring AI very early, Java string templates even earlier, the billion row challenge, PDQ Bach, and the usual collection of silly tweets and toots. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. Welcome. My name's Ken Cousin. This is my free weekly newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side. If you don't feel like reading it, that's fine. I'll be happy to read it to you, along with the usual background information and director's cut type stuff. Let's get started. So this week, this is Tales from the Jar Side for the week of January 14th through 21st, 2024. I actually got the dates right this time. This week, I taught my first Spring AI course on the O'Reilly Learning Platform, and I did an NFJS virtual workshop on latest features in Java, both of which are topics of this week's newsletter. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads, and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or viewer or listener. If you wish to become a jarhead, there is a button directly on the newsletter. The newsletter can always be found, well, at this point, at kencousin.substack.com. Let's take a quick look at the YouTube channel just to see how that's doing. The YouTube channel, again, as usual, is located at youtube.com/@talesfromthejarside. We are currently showing 1.14K subscribers. I think the actual number is like 1145, 46, something like that. There was no new different video this week. I mean, other than the newsletter video. I didn't put up a regular video. I'm working on a couple of ideas. I'm not quite satisfied with them yet. I'm going to do something with the Olama capability of putting in additional LLM models that you run locally on your own machine, but can access them remotely. So I'm thinking of using one of those Llama uncensored models and calling the video something like Uncensored Java, which sounds all scandalous, but of course is not at all. At any rate, that's what's in the works. We'll see if that makes it out this week. That's the plan. Let's go back to the newsletter. The big topic this week for me, the big event this week, was the new Spring AI course that I taught on the O'Reilly Learning Platform. And that was a pretty stressful course, at least getting prepared for it and everything was, because the Spring AI project is still very early in its life cycle. Let's take a look at the web page for that. You can see here at the reference docs, the version of Spring AI is currently 0.8.0. And I've been mentioning this in the last couple of newsletters, and I actually have the Git repository checked out. So I check every day to see what they've committed, just to see if I can get any sense of when they're going to be done with version 0.9 or 1.0 or what have you. And that's changing pretty frequently, but it's not there yet. At any rate, this is the home page. This is the project on GitHub. You can see they discuss it down here, along with some updates as recently as about 10 days ago. But it's still under rapid evolution. So given that, you can't expect too much out of it. They've done a pretty good job, and the class went really well, or let's say better than I probably deserved. Because I did lower the expectations right at the beginning. I did point out that we are in an alpha stage of this project. Maybe you'd call it an early beta, I don't know. But it's certainly not something I'd want to put into production right yet. But on the other hand, a lot of the major features that we want are there. It does have prompt templates that let you run the same prompt with different variables plugged in each time. It's got Spring's regular resource abstractions, so you could put the prompt templates in another folder and then load them on the class path. That's really kind of nice. It's got output parsers, which are a little dicey. I'm going to show you an example of one in a minute called a bean output parser, which makes it relatively easy to convert from the string text response into an actual Java class. I had some issues with that. Of course, the big thing that a lot of people are looking forward to is the embedding client in the vector databases. It's what they call RAG here, Retrieval Augmented Generation. The whole concept behind uploading your own information so that the AI, whose, of course, knowledge base taps out earlier this year or last year or what have you, can then have more recent or your own information to search from when it's trying to answer questions. So I did demos of all these different things. Now, speaking of that output parser, here's my project with the Spring AI examples. I will put the GitHub link to the GitHub repository in the notes, but I think it's linked in the newsletter anyway. Here's a class called Actor Service, and it's based on a bean called Actors Films. You see Actors Films here is just a simple record with a string actor and a list of string, which are presumably the movies that they have appeared in. So one of the big features of the Spring AI API is it has a class called Chat Client, and you could auto-wire that in. Now, when I auto-wired it in, I had to put in a qualifier, because one of the other things you could do with Spring AI is switch between Chat Client implementations. I have in here both one from OpenAI and one from Ollama, so that I could work with systems already downloaded, LLMs already on my machine. There are several others planned. They have a lot of implementations in mind. That's the whole point of the API framework, is it's supposed to be pretty versatile and flexible and work with multiple different implementations. This method called getActorFilms takes a string actor name and instantiates the bean output parser with the record in it, so that when you call getFormat, it will give you back the JSON distribution, or as it says here, provides the expected format of the response, instructing that it should adhere to the generated JSON schema. So that's pretty nice. It's going to wind up looking at the bean, and presumably by reflection, I haven't looked at the underlying code, but presumably it will be able to infer what the corresponding JSON schema should be for that Java class. Now, the template here is not, in this case, saved in a separate file. I actually put it in as a text block, a multi-line string in Java, and it says generate the filmography for the actor, and then you see actor in braces, and then format right below it also in braces. And the idea is that when you instantiate a prompt template, you provide that multi-line string as the first argument, and the second argument is a map of keys and values, where the keys are the template names and the values are the variables you want to plug into it. Then, once you have the prompt template, you create a new prompt by just calling create message on it and using that to instantiate the prompt. You call the generate method on the client with the prompt, and then drill down, and you can get the content and then parse it. And that will parse the response into the beans that you provided. At least that's the idea. Now let me show you the problem with this. So here's a test I have where the actor I'm going to put in here is Margot Robbie, and I'm going to say get actor films, and then drill down into the movies and print out the names of all the movies and make sure that the actor name that comes back should be Margot Robbie, and then I'll look at the movies. But we're going to have a bit of an issue. Now I'm going to cut out the time it takes to run this, so be right back. Now that took a bit longer than I was hoping for, but if I look at the output, you can see the problem. The problem is that the response that came back started with 3 backticks and the word JSON, and then you have your object, your actor and the movie she's been in, and then ends with 3 backticks as well. The problem is that when the JSON parser encounters those backticks and the word JSON, it doesn't know what to do. So the parser throws an exception, a JSON parse exception, of course, because of those extra characters. By the way, you also see that the model is not terribly current, because I don't see Barbie in there anywhere. And if you're going to mention Margot Robbie, you're going to have to mention the Barbie movie. So there's the problem. Now, to fix this problem after some facility, what I said in the newsletter is I had to tell it not to put that extra information inside. So here is the updated prompt. I added in this section that says, in your outputs, talking to the LLM, please do not include the backticks and the JSON expression, as in 3 backticks JSON and the corresponding closed backticks. Just include the format. So let me rerun this and see how that does. And now you can see it worked like a charm, because it did manage to return only the JSON response, which then the bean output parser was able to parse. And you see what I get here is the actual actor name and all of her movies all written out there Again, that's the JSON response, and here's just the list of movies, which was the only thing I printed. And again, it's missing the Barbie movie because of the time factor involved in training the AI. Okay, so that was one of the lessons from what I realized. And this is, again, the symptom of a project in its early stages. I would think that the code inside the bean output parser would check for something like that, would have some validation on the output or some regular expression or something that would extract the output from that very typical response. That is what the LLMs like to do. They do like to wrap code in some delimiter, and I would think that they would check for that, but it's so early in the project. Apparently, they've not put anything like that in there. Maybe I should raise an issue. I don't know. It's not that difficult to come up with a regex for that specific case, but I don't know how general that would be. I've done it myself when I did something like using Claude, but again, I don't know if that's general enough for what they want. Okay, so that worked, and I ran it during class, and it brought up another interesting example. Now, as for the RAG example, the retrieval augmented generation, the one they suggest tended to hang on the machine I have. The one that was in the workshop that they suggested had this big JSON object that was an array full of individual information about bicycles, and it had a list of bikes and descriptions and text and price and all those tags and everything. But these are a lot longer than they look. I mean, the descriptions kind of go on and on and on all that stuff. So there's a lot of data there. And the idea was to load that up and parse it and save it in a vector database. And in fact, you can see the code here. So the idea is to create a simple vector store, read the file, and then using a JSON reader that will parse it all into a list of documents, which you then add to the vector store. That will create embeddings for each of them. Then you do some sort of similarity search, looking for anything relevant to the query, and that cuts down the overall set of documents down to just a small handful. That handful is then added to a template with the overall request in it as part of a system message. See this get system message down here will put all of these similar documents together inside the request, and then the user request will ask some question about them, and hopefully you'll get back a response. Now that's the concept. If you use that big document, however, and ask the questions they suggested, what tended to happen to me is that it simply would hang. And what I finally tracked that down to is that somehow I think we exceeded the threshold on the size of the request, because even the cut down documents turned out to be too big, and then it just kept retrying. And I mean, fortunately, the retries didn't cost extra tokens, but it wasn't getting anywhere. So the only way I was able to make this work was to cut it down myself, was to change the request here. So they originally had the similarity search on the full message of similar documents. I said, no, when you're coming up with the similar documents, limit it to the top 2. And I just want 2, that's it, out of it. This was something I saw in an example done by Craig Walls, who was very helpful in helping me prepare for this course. Craig works for whatever they call the company now. It used to be Spring Source, and then it became Pivotal, and then it was VMware, and then Pivotal again, and now I think it's Broadcom. But whatever, he was very helpful in preparing for this, and that brought the size of the request down to something that actually worked. Now, I wasn't thrilled with the responses, especially because one of the questions was, tell me about this specific bicycle, and it goes, oh, I can't find a bicycle with that name, and there's a bicycle with that name in the database. So I don't have it all figured out. Craig also, by the way, has an example where he uploads a PDF of his book and therefore can ask questions about it. And in the newsletter, he used the Apache Tika project, which was a neat way to read in PDFs as well as PowerPoint files or Word documents or what have you, and then do a query on that. And it did a nice job on that. So I'd say overall the class went a lot better than probably deserves, but it went well enough. And there's still a long way to go for this to be really practical, but it's on its way. I did manage to switch to the Olama model, and that worked too. So that was kind of fun. The class is happening again in March, and hopefully by then they'll have version 1 out. I am supposed to give a No Fluff Just Stuff webinar. Let me show you that. Yes, this Friday, I'm giving Spring with Spring AI as a No Fluff Just Stuff free webinar. And here's the little bit of a description and everything. It's It's Friday, January 26th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you happen to be around, feel free to join me. Let me know that you're a jarhead. I should have mentioned it in the newsletter and I just forgot. So if you're interested, you've already heard some of the spoilers, but there it is. Okay, let's go back. Let's talk about string templates for a moment. I did my class on latest features in Java, and in there I usually limit myself to the things that are in the current version of Java or earlier. So I ran the class presumably on Java 21. When I put in my project, as you may be able to see here, I get a pop-up window saying newer IDE versions may discontinue support for Java preview features when Java 22 is released, ... because in the project settings, you can see that I did set it to be able to look for not only 21, but preview features of 21 as well. That's as far as you can go in this particular IDE. But that meant that one of the things that was available to IntelliJ was string templates. Now, I don't really plan to use string templates, but the idea here is that if you do string concatenation, like let me show you this for example. If I put in length plus a colon plus the word list like this, then I get a warning, and the warning says string can be replaced with a template. Now that's a preview feature in Java 21 and a preview feature in Java 22, second preview in 22. So I don't know if I should do that, but if you do, this is what it looks like. The capital STR, that's the processor, I think they call it, a template processor, and then a dot, and then the variables get plugged in inside the / curly braces syntax, and it looks just like a formatted string. I mean, it's not really all that profound, but it is a pretty ugly syntax. And I figured, what the heck, and I did use it, and it worked in the class. Not everything I did worked in the class, because I also use Gradle. And for example, I tried to use the unnamed variables where you just put in an underscore in the place of a variable that you need for placeholder considerations, but not for running. And Gradle didn't like that at all. It failed on that completely. So, I mean, there's always a delay between when they release a Java version and when I can use all the features in it because of the tool set that I use, IntelliJ and Gradle or Maven, and the testing tools and everything else associated with it. In this case, IntelliJ was okay with using an underscore, but Gradle was not. So, okay, so be it. So I commented on the ugliness of the syntax, but so be it. Let's move on. All right, next section. Now, this I meant to talk about last week, but the newsletter ran long, as it always does, and I didn't get to it. There's been something going on called the 1 billion row challenge, and Gunnar Morling, I'm not sure if that's his correct pronunciation or if there's an umlaut on the O. I don't think there was in what I saw. At any rate, he proposed this thing called the 1 billion row challenge, and the idea was that you had to write Java code using Java 21 that analyzed a text file that had temperature data in it. And you had to determine the average temperature, the min, and the max, and you had to do it as quickly as possible. The quirky part, of course, is that this wasn't a small text file. It contained 1 billion rows of data. So the question was, can you optimize your code to process that as quickly as possible? Now, I put a link here to this, but this isn't actually to the billion row challenge. It's to the JVM Weekly issue that discussed all this. Who's the fastest to process 1 billion Java records? Because this is really a much better description than anything I would have done. And it's got this great diagram in here, which is a gag of the different types of developers you encounter in what he referred to the regular advent of code that happens every year in December. And you're an average software developer, and yet you get these unbelievable developers, and who always wind up in the top 5 or 10. And it's a riot. I do highly recommend you take a look at that. I'm not the sort of developer who cares that much about optimizing space and time. I'm more concerned with teaching the proper coding style and maintenance and doing things the quote right way, whatever that means, and not necessarily optimizing it for, performance. Which meant that from my point of view, it was a spectator sport. I was curious about it. I wanted to see what happened. But the solutions went way beyond what I understood very, very quickly. I mean, there was some amazing stuff in there. See, this is the GitHub repository for the Billion Row Challenge itself, at github.com/gunnermorling/1BRC. And if I scroll down past all the contributions, there's a table here with the results. And they describe the server running, 8 cores, 32 core AMD, Epic 7, whatever you see there, 128 gigs of RAM. And right now, the fastest one, that even improved since the last one I saw was when I wrote the newsletter yesterday, was number 3 now. 2 of them have jumped in front of that. And now they're down to 2.2 seconds for processing a billion rows. It is kind of neat that they're using the Gradle virtual machine native binaries to do all of this, and the unsafe class, which basically, from my understanding, allows it to avoid the boundary checking, the limits that are built into Java for checking array index boundaries. You don't want to exceed the length of an array and all that. Well, here they know exactly what they're doing, and they're like, no, turn that off. I don't want the performance penalty for doing that. And, if you're interested, you could see it, and there's links to all the different solutions. And the original one was the one by Gunnar Morling. It took almost 5 minutes to run. And now they're down to 2.2 seconds. So, okay. So, at any rate, if you're interested, there's a link. Okay, the next section was on the wonderful composer Peter Schickele, who is the discoverer of the awesome composer PDQ Bach. I'm presuming that you are familiar with the phrase PDQ, pretty darn quick, or whatever they say. PDQ Bach was described by Schickele as the last and definitely the least of the 20-odd children of Johann Sebastian Bach, and by far the oddest, as they say. And yes, Schickele was a real composer, went to Juilliard, did some really good stuff, but his comedy routine was fantastic. He started doing it at Juilliard, at least according to the Wikipedia page, and it just caught on. It became a whole career for him. He took PDQ Bach on the road like 6 months of the year for year after year after year. It's one of those things that grew way bigger than his regular series career did. You get the feeling like Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan lamented the fact that nobody took his serious music seriously because all they wanted to hear was Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, So be it. So this was PDQ Bach, and it's really funny stuff. And they're all the music, which is discovered in trash cans and other places, is parody music. Like the titles are great. The Abduction of Figaro. So that's the abduction from the Seraglio, and the Marriage of Figaro. Hansel and Gretel and Ted and Alice, which the old movie Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and an opera in one unnatural act, and the haunting carol, Oh Little Town of Hackensack. There's some great stuff here. As Schickele says, he divided PDQ Bach's fictional musical output into 3 periods: the initial plunge, the soused period, and contrition. On and on. There's Schickele discovering some of the music from a trash can nearby. Now, this was from a New York Times article, and I did put in a guest link. So if you want to read the article, you can. I shared that out, so you can take a look if you like. I actually did know about PDQ Bach at a relatively young age. In college, a friend had a copy of the biography of PDQ Bach written by Schickele, which you wouldn't think, music would translate to biography form, but it was some really funny stuff. And I learned about him there. I didn't really hear any of the music back then. It was much later when I got to hear the music. And then I did actually go to see him. He came to Hartford in the early 2000s. It turns out when I did a search, I found the Hartford Courant review of the concert on April 21st of 2001. I thought it was much earlier than that, but I think he took like a 10-year gap performing when he was on the verge of retiring. And this was right after he had come back for a little while. So I got to see him perform Oedipus texts and a few other things. I do remember him running down the aisle like he was late, like he'd totally forgotten about the concert or something was wrong. I didn't realize that was a running gag, that he did that every time. I did perform not as part of that concert, but our church choir did the seasonings, and we also did the madrigal, "My bonny lass, she smelleth," and there are the lyrics if you're interested. "My bonny lass, she smelleth, making the flowers jealous," and on. "My bonny lass would be nice, yea, even at twice the price." I don't have the music anymore, but I remember it was pretty funny. So if you're interested, take a look. It's a shame that he passed away, but he had quite an interesting life. The Wikipedia page is pretty up to date on him. And there are tons, as it turns out, of YouTube videos on Schickele performances of old rediscovered PDQ Bach works. I think he referred to PDQ Bach once as the only deceased composer you can actually commission from. There's that. Let's go on to the tweets and twos. Okay, too soon? So the Atlanta Falcons tweeted, "We have interviewed Bill Belichick for our head coach opening," and somebody immediately responded with, "Can you tell us about a time you faced significant odds and how you overcame them?" Which is to all of us in New England and presumably everybody in Atlanta is a reference immediately to that Super Bowl where the Atlanta had a 28-3 lead over New England late in the third quarter, and Tom Brady pulled off the biggest achievement of his career, arguably, bringing the Patriots back to win in overtime. It's incredible. I still can't believe he pulled that one off. It doesn't quite make up for blowing 2 Super Bowls to the Giants. I mean, that, especially the perfect season, I'm still upset about that. But it's close, I mean, arguably they should have won the first one and lost the second one. What are you going to do? But let's move on. Belichick is no longer the coach of the Patriots, which I still find surprising, but both sides were totally ready to end that. When I grew up, my parents and all 4 of my grandparents were all based in the Washington, D.C. area, so we were fans of the Washington football team for generations. Dan Snyder effectively destroyed that. I mean, like he did for so many fans of that team. And I moved to New England in the late 80s, and I'd always kind of liked the Patriots anyway. So I rooted for the Patriots pretty much for a good 10, 12 years, seriously, until Tom Brady showed up and Belichick showed up, and the rest, as they say, is history. And we had a great 20-year run, and if they're terrible for the next decade, well, okay, we paid for that. I'd take that trade anytime. But it will feel very weird watching Belichick somewhere else. I don't know where he's going to go. At the time we're recording this, he's interviewed a couple of places, but there's no official word unless something happened in the last couple hours. But that's what I know. Okay, this one I called to L. Ron to L. Ron. Yes. Did you know that in the Lord of the Rings, Rivendell was built on a low outcrop of stone above the river Brunim, whatever? You don't say. You could say that Elrond was an elf. No, on a shelf. I hate you. That reminds me, I forgot to do the subtitle this week. Okay, hang on. People always talk about animal husbandry, but that doesn't that neglect animal wifery? Yeah, that one's probably better off neglecting it. Okay. This one on camouflage. Ever notice how uncanny animal camouflage is? These animals disappear into their environments like a ninja, and you can barely make out the cat here. That's pretty good. This owl, wow, did that blend in? That's amazing. But I mean, I've been staring at this picture down at the bottom for hours, and I can't find an animal in it. People say there's a bear, but I don't see it. Yeah, okay. This one, now you know. So to get away from the cops, that's apparently why the chicken crossed the road. I can see that. That ought to work. So this one is an old 2001 A Space Odyssey one. Let's see if I can magnify that a little bit. It says, "Open the pod bay doors, Hal." I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Pretend you're an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737-9 MAX. That would do it. Unfortunately, that joke would have worked better last week, but hey, I'll take it. That was really good. This one on anti-vaxxers be like, took the batteries out of the carbon monoxide alarm because the loud beeping was giving me a headache and making me feel sick and dizzy. Yeah, and the response being, that's it. That's what anti-vaxxers sound like. Right? In a nutshell. Here, somebody suggested replacing the statues of Columbus with statues of Columbo. And yeah, one more thing. Yeah, that's perfect. I wonder where they got that image of a statue of Columbo. That's great. But, I'm an old white guy. In my generation, Columbo's the ultimate. He's great. Okay, too close to home. This one says, now that I've lived through an actual plague, I totally understand why Italian Renaissance paintings are just naked fat people lying on couches. Yeah. No, I'm going to let that one ride. Yeah, I did say I resemble that remark, but I'm just going to keep going. This one says, and it's only a murder of crows if there's probable cause. Yeah. I was going to use that as a subtitle. I think I probably should have, but oh well. There you go. And finally, this one says, I murdered someone, your dog, and I'm totally cool with that. I love you. Or I murdered someone, and your cat. Me too. Yeah. Have a great week, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. This week, I don't have any training classes, but I'm starting a new course at Trinity for the spring on large scale and open source computing. Hopefully it'll involve something involving humanitarian, free, and open source software. I'm still figuring out the details. That ought to be fun, which is good because it starts tomorrow night, Sure, maybe I should figure out some of that ahead of time, but I'll let you know how that goes, and we'll have some fun with it. There's also the No Fluff, Just Stuff webinar this Friday, so maybe I'll see some of you there. Otherwise, I'll see you all next week. Cue that theme song.
Hey there, Des, it's time to tune in to Tales from the Jar, so let's begin. Java, Kotlin, Spring, oh my. Cookie, Gradle, don't be shy. Tales from the Jar side, oh yeah. Crack open the code, let's take a ride. From design patterns to the latest trends, your weekly tech talks that never end.